Welcome to Warriors of the World. Close your eyes and imagine yourself on a dark battlefield, beneath the cloudy skies of medieval Europe. The cold bites at your skin as the sound of clashing swords and screams echoes around you. Suddenly, the silence is shattered by the roar of men, or are they beasts? Charging forward. These aren't ordinary warriors. They are the feared berserkers. Every step they take carries the threat of imminent destruction. The bear and wolf skins draped over their bodies flap in the wind, and their eyes burn with an animalistic, almost supernatural fury. You feel something in your bones. Fear. The fear of what's about to come. Now, imagine what went through the mind of a soldier who, before drawing his sword, saw these half-human monsters rushing furiously toward him. There are no strategies, no elaborate tactics, only pure terror. Berserkers were known for entering a state of uncontrollable rage, called berserkergang, where they felt no pain, fear, or mercy. It was as if, on the battlefield, they ceased to be men and became literal beasts, possessed by a supernatural force. Accounts of these battles are filled with scenes of total chaos. It's said that they would tear off their own clothes, bite their shields, and charge into battle naked, blinded by fury and singularly focused on destroying anyone or anything in their path. Can you imagine the scene? Men who faced spears and swords without a moment's hesitation, as if death wasn't even an option. Warriors who seemed immortal amidst the carnage. These men weren't just feared, they were living legends. Their strength was believed to come from mystical powers or perhaps even the blessing of Odin, the god of war and wisdom. But what exactly turned them into these uncontrollable beasts? Was it dark rituals, hallucinogens, or simply a raw will to survive at any cost? The answer lies both in reality and myth. Let's dive deeper into the origins, tactics, and true essence of these warriors who left a trail of severed limbs and blood throughout history. Get ready to uncover the legend of the Berserkers, where man and beast merged into one, creating a legacy that lives on today. Now that you understand the impact of the Berserkers on the battlefield, we need to step back a bit in time. Let's explore the world these warriors emerged from, as it was fundamental in shaping their legendary ferocity. We're in Scandinavia, between the 8th and 11th centuries, a land dominated by icy mountains, merciless seas, and dense forests. The harsh winters didn't just batter the skin but also hardened the hearts of those who lived there. The climate and geography forged a warrior people, always in search of more fertile lands and wealth. This is how the Vikings began their raids, first as marauders, later as colonizers. Though often remembered solely for their brutal conquests, the Vikings were deeply spiritual. Their lives were intertwined with their beliefs in the Norse gods, powerful beings like Odin, Thor, and Freya. Of all these deities, Odin was directly associated with war and wisdom. He was the patron of warriors, and many believed that berserkers fought in his name, possessed by his spirit, granting them that supernatural fury. It was as if, in every battle, these men were proving themselves worthy of Valhalla, the warrior's paradise, where they would be honored for their deeds and could eat, drink, fight, and slaughter each other in combat for eternity. Understand that, in the Viking mindset, dying in battle wasn't just a possibility, it was a glorious destiny. This is where the berserkers gained even more power. They didn't fear death, they welcomed it with open arms, as long as they could take as many enemies as possible with them. This desire for immortality through violence wasn't just a cultural trait but a driving force that made them fight as if there were no tomorrow. For their enemies, often, there wasn't. During the great Viking invasions, whether in Britain, Ireland, or the distant lands of Russia, the berserkers were often placed at the front lines. Their brutality wasn't just physical. It started long before the battle even began. The mere mention that berserkers were among the Viking forces spread panic, causing entire villages to surrender or flee before even seeing their enemies. Historical accounts from this period are filled with stories of villages being abandoned in haste, with inhabitants fleeing at the sound of war drums. Now that you've grasped the historical context of the berserkers, it's time to understand what truly set them apart from other Viking warriors. It wasn't just their ferocity, it was something much deeper, almost beyond human. These warriors were the embodiment of chaos on the battlefield. Imagine an ordinary man, trained his whole life for war, following strategies and maintaining calm. Now picture the opposite. A berserker didn't follow strategies. He was fury in motion, driven by a wild frenzy that led him to ignore any obstacle, fear or even pain. Berserkers often fought without any armor. While other warriors tried to protect themselves, they charged nearly naked or covered in bear or wolf skins, symbols that represented the transformation they underwent on the battlefield. The name berserker itself comes from the terms ber, bear, and serker, shirt, suggesting that these warriors literally wore bear shirts. For the Vikings, this meant that they were invoking the power of these creatures, becoming one with them. But this transformation wasn't just physical. Berserkers entered a mental state known as berserkergang. In this frenzied trance, they lost any sense of rational control. Accounts from that era describe men biting their shields, foaming at the mouth, and roaring like wild beasts. What's even more remarkable is that, in this state, they didn't seem to feel pain. Severe injuries that would stop any other warrior weren't enough to halt a berserker. They kept fighting as if something beyond the natural world was driving them. This behavior led many to believe they had supernatural powers. Some modern scholars suggest that this might have been the result of hallucinogenic substances, like the use of Amanita muscaria mushrooms, or possibly intense rituals that induced a state of ecstatic frenzy. Others propose that the berserkergang was simply an extreme form of psychological conditioning, where warriors trained themselves to ignore any sign of pain or fatigue and surrender entirely to destruction. Likely a combination of all these factors. Whatever the explanation, one thing is certain. Berserkers were warriors who not only inspired fear but also transcended human limits. When they entered battle, they became beasts, leaving rationality behind and embracing pure savagery. This made them relentless and, above all, unpredictable. Among the berserkers, some names stood out in both sagas and real battles, becoming iconic figures of rage and power. These warriors weren't just feared in life. They were also revered in stories passed down through generations. The first of these is a mythical figure who, to this day, inspires both admiration and awe, Egil Skallagrimsson. Egil, a famous Viking warrior and poet, appears in the saga of Egil, where his deeds are recounted with a blend of brutality and intelligence. Though Egil wasn't technically a berserker in the traditional sense, he displayed typical berserker traits: uncontrollable fits of rage, superhuman strength, and an incredible ability to survive bloody battles. Egil not only won countless fights but also defied kings and sailed across Europe in search of revenge and honor. His name became synonymous with a Viking who was as brutal as he was cunning, blending the berserker's fury with the strategic mind of a leader. Another legendary name is Bodvar Bjarki, the hero of Rolf Kraki's saga. He's described as one of the most powerful berserker warriors, capable of transforming into a giant bear during battles. Bodvar was so feared that when he fought, it seemed like an actual beast was tearing through enemies on the battlefield. He was believed to possess the power of metamorphosis, allowing him to be unstoppable in combat. His character represents the pinnacle of the berserker legend, where the line between man and beast completely fades. Another iconic figure, though more rooted in mythology than history, is the fearsome Ulfr, or wolf warrior, mentioned in several Norse sagas. These warriors not only wore wolf skins but also, according to legends, invoked the spirit of these creatures to gain unmatched strength and courage. The wolf symbol was so powerful that some warriors believed that by wearing its skin, they could literally acquire the essence of wolves, becoming insatiable predators on the battlefield. Beyond these mythological examples, berserkers also appear in historical contexts. During the Viking invasions of Britain, berserkers were often mentioned in accounts from monks who documented the brutal raids on monasteries and villages. Many of these reports describe men with inexplicable strength, advancing without fear or hesitation, a description that perfectly fits the profile of these possessed warriors. These names and stories aren't just ancient tales. They represent the essence of what it meant to be a berserker, a warrior who not only fought with physical strength but also with an uncontrollable fury, fueled by something far beyond a desire for victory. For these men, each battle was a chance to transcend humanity and become a living legend. When we think of berserkers, the first image that comes to mind is of uncontrollable men, attacking with wild, unrelenting fury. But it would be a mistake to believe they were just mindless machines of destruction. Behind that insane violence, there was a method that, in many cases, was crucial to the Vikings' victories. This began long before the battle. The strategy of using berserkers on the front lines was calculated to cause the greatest psychological impact possible. Viking leaders knew that fear was a powerful weapon, and berserkers were masters of inciting this terror. Before swords even clashed, the mere sight of these men, covered in animal skins, beating their shields, and screaming like madmen, deeply shook enemy armies. This use of psychological warfare was one of the berserkers' greatest weapons. Additionally, the unpredictability of berserkers on the battlefield was a major advantage for the Vikings. While many armies followed rigid formations and predetermined tactics, berserkers did the opposite. They broke enemy formations, creating chaos. Charging like a shock troop, their disorderly onslaught forced the enemy to abandon organized strategies. An army prepared to face rows of regular Viking warriors suddenly found itself facing a force that attacked as if possessed. This completely dismantled enemy lines and allowed the bulk of the Viking army to follow behind, exploiting the chaos created by the berserkers. But how did these warriors survive without heavy armor and with such a risky fighting style? The answer lies in their total disregard for pain and their use of aggressive, rapid tactics. Berserkers didn't retreat or give the enemy space to breathe. They attacked with the intent to end the battle as quickly as possible. Contrary to what one might think, they didn't fight alone. They always had the support of other Viking warriors who, upon seeing the berserkers clearing a path, quickly followed to ensure the offensive's success. A fundamental aspect of the berserkers' strategy was the use of simple, effective weapons. Axes, short swords, and spears were their weapons of choice, all designed to deliver quick, lethal strikes. Instead of focusing on long duels or technical combat, they preferred to land direct, brutal blows, often using their body weight to crush the enemy. The combination of their physical strength and the use of short, devastating weapons made them deadly machines in close combat. However, berserkers weren't invincible. Their reckless fighting style made them vulnerable to well-coordinated and organized attacks. While they caused immediate destruction, when facing disciplined and well-armed armies like the Saxons or Franks, their tactical weaknesses could be exploited. When isolated from the rest of the Viking army, berserkers could be surrounded and annihilated. This is why their effectiveness depended on precise coordination with more disciplined Viking warriors, who used the chaos generated by the berserkers to attack the enemy's weaknesses. In this way, berserkers weren't just mindless machines of destruction. They were an integral part of a larger strategy, where their unpredictability and fury were channeled to break the enemy's morale and formations, allowing the Viking army as a whole to take advantage of the chaos to secure victory. Berserkers are best known for their brutality in battle, but there are many fascinating aspects about these warriors that go beyond their feats on the battlefield. They were immersed in a world of rituals, superstitions, and traditions that made their daily lives as extraordinary as their combat achievements. Here are some of the most interesting curiosities about these Norse warriors. One of the mysteries surrounding the berserkers is the cause of their uncontrollable fury. While sagas speak of possession and divine blessings, some scholars believe berserkers may have ingested psychotropic substances before entering battle. One widely accepted theory is that they used Amanita muscaria mushrooms, known for their hallucinogenic properties. By consuming them, the warriors entered a trance state where pain and fear seemed to vanish while adrenaline surged to uncontrollable levels. While this theory isn't confirmed by definitive evidence, it offers a plausible explanation for the berserkers' erratic behavior and insensitivity to pain. While many berserkers wore bare skins, there was another, even more terrifying category: the Ulfhednar, or wolf warriors. These fighters donned wolf skins and, according to sagas, fought with the cunning and ferocity of an actual wolf. More than just warriors, the Ulfhednar were considered the elite among berserkers and, at times, even more feared. Norse mythology associates these warriors with the legend of werewolves, beings capable of shifting between human and animal forms. This led to the belief that the Ulfhednar not only wore wolf skins but also channeled the spirit of these creatures, becoming true predators on the battlefield. Although valued as the vanguard of Viking invasions, berserkers were also feared by their own people. Their fits of rage weren't limited to battles. In peacetime, berserkers were known to get involved in brawls and violent behavior. For this reason, many Viking chieftains kept berserkers under strict control, only unleashing their fury when absolutely necessary. There are accounts of Viking kings and lords keeping these warriors away from villages to prevent unnecessary destruction. With the transition from the pagan to the Christian era in Scandinavia, the image of the berserkers began to change. Christianity frowned upon warriors who claimed to fight in a trance or under the influence of supernatural forces. By the 11th century, the berserkergang was officially condemned as a crime. In some regions, anyone displaying typical berserker behavior could be tried and even executed. This marked the end of an era in which possessed warriors were gradually replaced by more disciplined armies aligned with Christian values. It's believed that berserkers performed rituals before battles to prepare themselves mentally and physically. These rituals included frantic dances, war cries, and even self-mutilation. These behaviors were meant to depersonalize the warrior, making him less human and more akin to a wild beast or spirit. Additionally, berserkers believed that by invoking the fury of an animal, whether a bear or a wolf, they would gain the strength and endurance of those creatures. These elements show that berserkers were much more than mere warriors. They were part of a unique cultural and spiritual phenomenon, blending pagan rituals, ancient myths, and controlled violence that, while feared, was widely used by the Vikings. Over time, their legends transcended history, becoming supernatural figures in collective memory. Berserkers may have disappeared physically centuries ago, but their legacy remains very much alive in modern culture. These fierce, untamed figures have transcended history and infiltrated the worlds of cinema, literature, comics, and video games, where they continue to fascinate and terrify in equal measure. Many Viking-themed movies depict the brutality of berserkers. A notable example is the film The Northman, 2022, which explores Viking mythology and behavior with brutal authenticity. In this film, we see warriors who, in a state of rage, embody the spirit of the berserkers, using their supernatural abilities to terrorize their enemies. The scene of the transformation into beasts in battle provides a powerful visual representation of the berserker legend. Another classic is The 13th Warrior, 1999, which, although not explicitly mentioning berserkers, portrays Viking warriors with wild, uncontrollable behavior during battles. These films capture the spirit of destruction that berserkers represented and show how cinema uses their legends to create impactful and immersive scenes. In literature, berserkers frequently appear in sagas and historical novels. One example is Bernard Cornwell's Saxon Chronicles series, where berserkers are depicted as unstoppable warriors, described as flesh-and-blood monsters who spread chaos wherever they go. The series strikes a balance between mythology and history, offering a detailed view of these warriors during the Viking invasions. In comics, berserkers have also had a prominent role. In Thor by Marvel Comics, these warriors often appear as antagonists or legendary figures connected to Asgard, reinforcing the link between brutal power and Norse mythology. Thor himself, the god of thunder, embodies the spirit of the berserkers in many interpretations, channeling uncontrollable fury and power in his epic battles. In video games, perhaps berserkers have had their most brilliant portrayal, allowing players to experience the fury of these warriors in a visceral way. In games like Assassin's Creed Valhalla, you can control a Viking warrior who, in many missions, fights alongside berserkers or even adopts their tactics and behavior in combat. The game faithfully depicts Viking battles, and the presence of berserkers adds an extra layer of intensity and savagery to the missions. Another famous title is the For Honor franchise, where players can choose between different classes of warriors, including berserkers. The game portrays berserkers as a ferocious class with fast, relentless attacks, perfectly representing their unpredictable and destructive nature. The legend of berserkers has also infiltrated the world of music, especially in the heavy metal genre. Bands like Amon Amarth are known for their lyrics that depict Viking life, and berserkers are often mentioned in songs that evoke brutality and the warrior spirit. The band, with its roots in Norse mythology, exalts berserker fury as a metaphor for rebellion and uncontrollable strength. Berserkers are also a constant presence in RPGs and board games. In the famous Dungeons & Dragons, for example, there is a character class known as the Barbarian, directly inspired by berserkers. These characters enter a rage state, increasing their strength and resilience but losing the ability to fully control their actions, a clear reflection of the berserker legend. In the board game Blood Rage, players control Viking clans and can recruit berserkers to their forces. This game captures the spirit of the Viking invasions and the use of berserkers as a tool of destruction in battles. As we approach the end of our journey through the world of the berserkers, one question remains. How should we remember these furious warriors? For some, they were heroes, men who embraced their wild nature to defend their lands and honor their gods. For others, they They were villains, symbols of pure destruction, capable of bringing terror to any battlefield. But the truth is, berserkers defy simple classification. On one hand, Viking mythology and historical accounts portray them as true war champions, figures who, by surrendering to the fury of battle, embodied the essence of warrior spirits. For the Vikings, the berserkergang, the uncontrollable rage, was seen as a divine gift, a power that elevated them beyond ordinary humanity. Those who faced them knew they weren't just fighting men, they were facing something greater, almost supernatural. In this sense, berserkers were heroes of their culture, revered as symbols of courage and raw power. This leads to a question. Where do we draw the line between heroic courage and brutal savagery? If berserkers fought with divine fury, were their actions justifiable, even if they resulted in destruction and death? Or, on the other hand, was their violence a symbol of human weakness, a loss of control in the face of primal instincts? The answer to these questions varies depending on who you ask. To the Vikings, they were necessary. In times of war, fear was a powerful weapon, and berserkers embodied that fear. They were the storm before death, the chaos that destabilized their enemies before the first blow was even struck. However, to the conquered peoples, berserkers were something very different. They were monsters. Christian monks' accounts speak of Vikings who invaded villages like a hurricane, destroying everything in their path. To these observers, berserkers were nothing less than a force of evil, relentless in their mission to sow chaos. This negative view of the berserkers intensified with the arrival of Christianity in Scandinavia. By the 11th century, berserkergang was officially condemned, seen as barbaric behavior incompatible with emerging Christian morality. Gradually, these warriors disappeared, replaced by more disciplined armies aligned with emerging Christian values. But what about us, today? How should we see them? As we've seen, modern culture remains fascinated by berserkers. They appear in movies, games, and books, often as heroes or anti-heroes, characters whose brutality is both admired and feared. They represent the most primitive part of the human soul, the ability to fight without limits, to abandon control, and embrace chaos. But they also represent the moral dilemmas of every warrior. How far can we justify violence for a cause? What separates a defender from a destroyer? In the end, perhaps the true lesson of the berserkers lies in reflecting on the limits of violence. They show us that raw power, when uncontrolled, can turn against its own wielder. They were both heroes and villains, depending on who saw them. And this ambiguity is what makes them such fascinating figures, even today. It seems that the cultivation of such skills was a highly effective tool on the battlefield. We've reached the end of our journey through the battlefields, myths, and hearts of the berserkers. Warriors who transcended human limits and became legends, immortal figures amidst the chaos. The legacy of the berserkers is marked by uncontrollable fury, by strength that defied death, and above all, by the transformation of ordinary men into true beasts of war. But what can we take from these stories beyond the blood and brutality? Berserkers represent the eternal duality of the human being. On one side, the desire to protect, to fight for something greater, whether for their lands, their gods, or their ideals. On the other side, the price of that strength. As we've seen, berserkers were willing to abandon their humanity on the battlefield, fully surrendering to their rage. Were they heroes or villains? The answer, as always, depends on your point of view. For the Vikings, they were necessary, heroes who instilled terror in their enemies and ensured victory. But for those who faced their wrath, they were something darker. Monsters, the embodiment of chaos that destroyed everything in their path. We can draw parallels with issues we still face today. In times of war and conflict, how far is it acceptable to go to ensure victory? How far is destructive power justifiable? The story of the berserkers challenges us to think about our own limits. All of us, at some level, face internal battles. Moments when we are tempted to let anger and aggression take over. But unlike the berserkers, who embraced this loss of control, we are called to reflect. When we give in to fury, are we moving away from what makes us human, or were these men truly human by embracing their divine animal side? Throughout this video, we've explored the complexity of these Viking warriors. But the question remains, what were these men, villains, or something that unites both things? What do you think? But remember, Sometimes the greatest victory isn't on the battlefield, but in controlling your own rage in a world where bowing your head and obeying is what will give you another day to dream. And so, we conclude our journey. If you enjoyed learning more about the Berserkers and want to keep exploring the stories of history's fiercest warriors, subscribe to the channel. Leave your comments, and let's keep this discussion going. Get ready for the next adventure here on Warriors of the World. After all, history is full of warriors like the Berserkers, who always challenge us to rethink what it means to fight.